Imagine a world where accommodation for individuals with diverse needs is no longer seen as exceptional, but rather as standard practice. How can we reshape societal norms and foster an inclusive environment where accommodations become an integral part of everyday lives? Tune in to today's interview to learn how we can make this a reality.
Welcome to Biz Help for You with host Candy Messer. Entrepreneurs like to focus on the big picture, like profitability, success, and a smooth running organization. But there always seems to be those little things like taxes, employee compensation, laws, regulations, and more. Now you can get the answers you need in one place. Join us today as we break it all down for you. Now, here's your host, Candy Messer.
Hello and welcome to Biz Help for You with Candy Messer. Thank you for joining me today. If you missed my last episode and would like to listen to the show, links can be found on my social media pages as well as multiple favorite podcast platforms. And if you'd like to receive notifications on when my podcasts have been uploaded, please like and subscribe. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my guest today. Katherine, a physically and neurodiverse woman herself, built her career on inclusive innovation as an entrepreneur in people, operations, and HR tech. She lives by the model that difference is not a deficit and now travels the world sharing this message through speaking and teaching. In 2014, she founded Titan Management, a national people operations consulting firm. And then in 2021, she shook up HR tech by designing the first ever fully accessible anti-bias applicant tracking system plugin that fires the resume and highlights company diversity. Now she's the COO and board member of the Octopus Movement and an international speaker. Featured at Web Summit, HR Disruptor, SHRM, and London School of Business, she makes an energetic, interactive, education-based speaker who always brings some spice. So, Katherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Candy. I'm excited to be here.
I think this is an important topic. I've actually recently had another couple interviews kind of on this issue of inclusion and diversity and neurodivergence and all of that. So I think this is going to tailor well with what we've talked about before. But before I get into questions that I have for you, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story and how did you start getting involved in sharing about this topic with others?
Yeah. And it is interesting. I think this is the first time that anybody's ever asked me how I got into telling this part of the story. They'll ask me how I got into my work or just in general, but this is actually the first time somebody's asked me that. So I've known that I was different since ever. I mean, there's never not been a time. My mother says she very first noticed my neurodiversity when I was about 4 years old or so. The very first thing to manifest was my obsessive compulsive disorder. And so it's been a fun journey. I got different diagnoses as I went along. The second kind of major diagnosis for me was bipolar at the time, called manic depression. Then I started getting on my physical diagnoses, and then it just kind of rolled from there. In fact, my doctor keeps trying to sneak in another disability, and I'm like, no, we're capping it at 6. We're cutting it off. This is just it. And talking about it did not come naturally. So the first time I ever realized that this was something that I needed to do, I was at Web Summit and I was there to present my technology. And I was in Portugal all by myself, right? Like nobody else didn't know anybody else in the country. And I woke up that morning and it was a timed speech, by the way. So I'd be very precise. And I woke up and I had 2 seizures and I couldn't remember anything. It just left. And I was like, oh no, I'm supposed to get on that stage in a few hours and I can't remember anything. So I kept reading my speech and it was just not working. My brain was just mush. It was like, nope, no, ma'am, we're not going to remember anything today. So I reached out, I got accommodations, and they were wonderful, by the way. Web Summit was extraordinary about how they responded to that. I got there, they had everything ready for me and then some. They were absolutely wonderful. I got up on stage, and before I started reading my speech, couldn't memorize it at that time, but before I started reading it, I told everyone why I was reading it. And then I dove in and still made it right before the buzzer went off and, and cut me off of my speech. And that really drew people to me. And a bunch of people started coming up and talking to me. They loved that I showcased my diversity when, talking about my product, which, is about diversity and inclusion. And people even came and found me at my booth days later, reached out to me afterwards. It was such an impact. And I thought, okay, I am not a vulnerable person by nature, but this is something that I need to do because it's actually going to help me with my work. And so I dove in, and now here we are. And now I'm so used to being vulnerable and open that I have, I say way too intimate of things, right off the bat to people. People, I'll meet them and they'll say something and I'll go, oh yeah, no, that's no problem. That's just my bipolar. I have that and a bunch of other neurodiversities. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm being so weird right now. This isn't one of the speeches. I gotta bring it back a little bit. So now I'm having to practice it the other way, but that's how I got into it. And it's been quite a wonderful journey. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's important to talk about these physical issues that sometimes people just don't see either, right? So they don't know that there might even be any issues. So how would you help us understand how we can see, potentially where some accommodations are needed, even if it's not 100% obvious, or are there questions that we should be asking when we are working with staff or others that can help them feel comfortable sharing? Because I'm sure a lot of people feel embarrassed or they're afraid of how people are going to perceive them.
It's more the second thing. It's rarely embarrassment. It's more fear, and for very good reason. Because historically it does not go well. So number one, never be nosy with your staff. It is not your business what their diagnosis is. Never, ever do that. Even when they're asking for an accommodation, little tip, it doesn't really matter why. All you need to know is the what and the how. That's it. Now, if it's something more expensive and you want to get some sort of documentation from their doctor just to say that, yes, they do need it or it would be beneficial, that's okay. I discourage that step unless it's important. But again, don't focus on the why. The person needs this. That's all that matters. It's going to help them work more healthy and more effective. That's the thing. The other thing, if it's not about what you ask at the time, if you haven't already built that culture, there's nothing you can say or do now. You've already botched it. So the journey starts at the beginning and with your entire design of how you lead and how you interact with your team. And one of the first things that you can do to create psychological safety in general, this is not just for inclusion purposes, is to respond to curiosity, not ego. And what I mean by that is not ego like I'm the king or queen of everything, right? But the ego mechanism that's completely natural in our brains, it's biological, everybody's got it. And it's that thing, so your brain needs to be right. And so it's the defense that when your brain meets adversity, something that disagrees with it, it will throw up defenses as to why it's correct. A lot of people respond with that. That's where you get answers like, well, this is how we've always done it, or this works for everybody else, or whatever other things, or it doesn't make sense to me. Well, I don't care. I'm telling you what I need. This isn't about you, So that's where you get those ego defenses. So instead of responding with that, universally across the board in every situation, work or otherwise, respond with curiosity. Tell me more about that. Or I'd like to understand a little bit better. May I ask some questions? Something like that. Respond with that curiosity. Also being vulnerable. Talking, and again, this was not natural for me, so I get what I'm saying here. But and you can be vulnerable in your own way. You don't have to open up as much as I do to be vulnerable. Just let your staff see that human side of you. Let them talk about when you're having a bad day and how that affects you. And that's good enough. It doesn't have to be super deep, but letting your people know that they can come to you and creating psychological safety so they know they can speak up, that they can dissent, and that they can have ideas without reprisal, and the action will be taken to support what they just said. That's very important too. When you've built that, people will naturally come to you.
Right. Well, and I can see how, if everyone is in an office space together too, and okay, we need a certain accommodation, maybe you need to have a standing desk so they can stand periodically and sit, or, just different things. There's so many different like issues that may require accommodation. That's just like one example of a physical accommodation. Right. But I could see in an office space where you may be able to implement that easier, but with remote staff, like how do you recommend people that are having employees working now from home or things like that to be able to make accommodations as well when we don't always see and engage as much as when we were face to face and past each other all the time in the office?
Well, number one, so one big thing that I tell everybody to offer, in person, remote, whatever, is that accommodations need to be shifted into standard options. There needs to be a list. This will also, by the way, build trust with your staff and let them know that you actually care because you bothered to come up with a list, right? So come up with a list, standard accommodations, and then have a fill in the blank, obviously, have a fill in the blank section. So that is something that can always be available to your staff. You can have a link to it and, whatever software you use, you can, have some form available to them at all times, however you want to do it, where that they can just request the things that they need. The other reason to have that list is that a lot of people don't know how to take care of themselves because they've not been allowed to. They don't know what they need. Sometimes they may not have a diagnosis. They don't have anything to base any research on, really, right? So they're kind of stuck. So that can really help. Having that standard accommodations setup really works. The other thing that it is so funny to me. So I've been remote since 2014, right? And so I'm very used to the setup, but it's new to a lot of people. But some of the wisdom that I can impart is that it's no different managing people remotely than it is in person. You still need to be paying attention. You still need to be watching for those same little signs, those same little indicators. And it's the same conversation either way, right? So all you're doing if you're a boss and you want to offer an accommodation, all you need to do is notice that something is wrong and then respond and go, hey, I have a tool that might help you. Is this something that would interest you? That's the end of it. Very, very simple. But people overcomplicate it. They make it seem like it's so different to manage remotely. Not at all. Right. It's exactly the same thing.
Well, and you were talking about making accommodations like standard options, right? Yeah. And so what are some of the barriers that you have seen that have prevented that from, coming to reality?
People that are stubborn. That's it. That's the only thing. I've implemented this so many times over. I've gotten government institutions to implement this. Okay, that if the government can figure it out and get this rolling, there is no excuse for anybody else. You're just being stubborn. And it's as simple as the way that I implement it is I teach my clients how to put it into their interview process and application process. Very simply, it's a link. It's so simple. Then you have the onboarding page. It just becomes part of the onboarding paperwork, whether electronic or physical. And then it's just, again, available somewhere in one of your systems so that people can access it as needed. Very easy. So it's extremely simple. It's free. So there is literally no barrier other than just being stubborn.
Well, like I was saying, there's so many different accommodations maybe that could be offered, and maybe we don't even know from our own situation what might work. So are there some 100%. Examples that you could give maybe that will prompt someone who's thinking like, oh, I didn't think that could be an accommodation? Like, can you share what some of those might be?
There's so many. And by the way, if anybody wants my list, just reach out to me. We'll tell you how to contact me at the end of this, but just reach out to me because I have the whole list. I've got a whole of like all the standard type of accommodations that you want to offer. And then you can just, again, fill in the blank from there, right? A lot of the things that people miss are the non-physical. So people think of tech, right? Like they'll think like Grammarly, which is great. They'll think standing desk, right? That type of thing. So all the physical things people usually kind of catch on to. It's the neuro and the psychological that they typically skip. So with neurodiversity, for instance, one of the most common things that people want is no contact interviews and people or life or work style. So people think that just means touching. It also applies to eye contact. So normalizing that people may not want to look you in the eye and understanding that has nothing to do with trust. So for instance, you may notice because I had my seizure activity just before we started this, that I'm not looking at the camera consistently. That's because if I do it too much, my brain will start to stress out and I'll have more seizure activity. So I'm looking off to the side. It's not that I'm not listening or paying attention. That's just what I need to do. Same thing with camera off interviews and meetings. And by the way, like this is always so funny to me. People that freak out about camera off meetings, I'm like, were you just too young to remember phone meetings, like phone conferences? This has been a thing since life. Like, this is an
Right.
old concept here. Calm down. This is not new. It's okay. It's so funny. People get so hysterical about that. And I'm like, dude, like, you're in your 50s. I know you remember this. I know you remember
Mm-hmm.
phone conferences. It's okay. So that type of thing. Another one is lighting. If you're in an office setting, different lighting can actually cause migraines. It can cause it can cause visual impairment, all types of issues, smells and sensitivity. So I have mast cell activation syndrome, and the kind of simple way to explain that is it's like if you gave allergy steroids. And so the weirdest things can make me go into anaphylaxis or get rashes, this type of thing. So I have to be very careful with the type of things that I'm around. So for me, environment is very important. Now I'm remote, so obviously I take care of that myself. But if I was in an office, this could be a problem. Another thing, and I will actually show here, are sensory toys and things like that. These are very important to embrace. And people are like, what do you mean toys that work? I'm like, no, this is absolutely imperative for so many people, whether it's ADHD, autism, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive, all different types of things. And they're just good for grounding and mental health exercises as well. So embracing all different types of sensory processing toys like fidgets, stress balls, different stuffies are really good for this kind of thing, including, by the way, for physical conditions. So with my seizures, weighted pillows or stuffed animals are good to help get me through that period. So this can also be a safety issue. So those are some kind of fun things. A yoga balls is chairs, especially for people with ADHD. It actually helps them focus and stuff. So those are some kind of fun ones that people don't think of, I think.
Mm-hmm. So were you saying then in like the interview process, you even have like a document that says like, do you need any of these accommodations, or do you just say, if you need accommodations, like talk with me so we can, like, how is that process?
So my calendar invite, depending on which one you're using, which link that I've sent to people, it can either just be blank, but when they get the email from me inviting them to an interview, there's a link to the standard accommodations. So it's here you go. Just let me know anything that you need in here and we're good. Very, very simple.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand as an employer too, like what is a good way for me to make sure that anyone who's applying to work with me or someone who is working with me, like I can easily find out what they may need. If some people, like I said, may not be confident to share because they might be afraid of the reaction that they're going to get, especially if someone's applying for a job. I would think that they might be afraid that, well, if I tell them I need an accommodation, I might not be considered for the position.
That is a big fear. Number one, don't put it in your application process. Not the right time. And please never, I've actually been seeing this with my own two eyeballs. This isn't like something that somebody told me. Companies are in this new weird phase of asking people what their disability actually is, like what their sexuality is. It's very off-putting. It's very concerning and very counter. And I think it's an inclusion effort, but it's just a hit and a miss. It's just not the right thing. So first of all, don't do it in the application process at all. When you're interviewing them, it should just be part of the interview invitation and just say, hey, these are options. Again, we're not saying accommodations. These are options that we offer. Please feel free to let us know anything that you would like or that would make you feel more comfortable. And then you just have the link or document or whatever it is that you want to do. Completely up to you. I like to use a link. That's just how I work, but it's up to you. And then they can just fill it out if they want to, or they don't. And it's very, very simple. And then again, the same kind of thing when you're onboarding them, it should just be part of the onboarding paperwork, and it's not accommodations. It's these are the options that we have for you. And then let us know anything else that you need. But also just having that list tells people that you care enough to have already thought about it. So you're probably a safe organization. It just kind of switches the mindset. I had a client, I taught a class to their team, their HR team, and they did this immediately, started doing it, and they immediately saw positive results and more people disclosing and more people saying what they needed. And even their own staff, people that had never said anything before, started going, oh yeah, that would be really great for me. Thank you. Immediate, just from having the list.
Right. Well, and I was thinking, like, at first, if you're going to have an applicant, maybe asking only because I've seen some things that will say, like, you have to offer these things even to applicants. And so if you don't know, then you could get yourself into a position maybe where you cause yourself some issues because you didn't have an option, or what, again, a lot of times the loss is accommodation for them. So that's why I thought, well, maybe at the beginning you have to ask or say something, as well. So
I've
I guess
not
it's walking
seen
that fine line.
I've not seen any state laws that,
Mm.
or federal, there's definitely not any federal, but I've not seen any state laws that would specify that needs to be in the application process. So you should be good on the
Okay.
legalities there. I've actually looked. I've not seen
Okay.
any.
Well,
So
I
unless there's a
know,
new one,
again,
of which I
it
am
may not be,
unaware.
it may not be like in the actual application, but I've seen, like, from California, right? Because I was a California business, I had California employees, and I do remember they would say specifically that you do have to offer accommodations even to applicants. But that's why I was like, well, how do you necessarily know from the
That's a
beginning? But I
different
guess
process.
they
Yeah, that's
could
a
they could let you know, maybe, like, I can't necessarily do this, but I could do this, and then at that point
right.
have that conversation.
And you do,
So,
but
okay.
that's a different process. So offering accommodations to applicants is a little bit different than what I'm talking about. So
Mhm.
applicants, although you can do it, the way that I like to do that, in fact, when I designed my ATS, this is kind of how we did it, is you just say, okay, this is how our application flows. At the very beginning, you just say, if this process is not inclusive for you, please just let us know and we'll work
Mhm.
with you. That's it.
Right.
Very, very simple. I also work with my clients to make their application process accessible so that it's not so much of a problem. But
Mhm.
but that's how you handle that. You just right at the beginning, just right before anything else happens, just have that little line in there and it kind of solves that problem. You don't really need to have the list there because the list of accommodations wouldn't really fix these problems. It's basically going to be you're just going to need a different interview process or a different
Mhm.
application process. So they just have them
Right.
let you know what they need and then off you go.
Mhm. So is there something else that you want to share that maybe I didn't know the question to ask, right? But you think it's good information to share with our listeners so they can make sure that they're having these standard options as much as possible.
Yeah, be flexible. First of all, be flexible and believe people. Like there's this weird misconception out there that people are just going to ask for accommodations that don't need them.
Mm.
Why? Like why would you ask for something that's not going to benefit you? There's nobody's going to ask for something that is not going to benefit them. That makes no sense. And it doesn't really matter if people have a diagnosis or not. And please remember how hard it is for some people to get a diagnosis. Okay, right here. There's one of my health conditions. It took us, hold on, how old am I? 19 years to get me a proper diagnosis. So
Wow.
please, please understand. This was, I mean, multiple of the top medical systems in the country looking at my very odd little body. So please understand that it can be very complicated. And so don't require a diagnosis. Keep the process very simple. Again, another reason just to have it as standard options, right? But believe people when they come to you and they talk to you. Believe them when they ask for something. There's no reason to make them jump through hoops. I think that's kind of a misnomer. Another one too is that a lot of companies are really trying to push inclusion, but they're forgetting to have measurables. It's just
Mm.
like, oh, we had some speakers come in. Woo, we win. Like, no, that's absolutely not it. So have measurables. Make sure that your DE&I is actually having measurable results, which it absolutely should have. If it's working appropriately, it should. So make sure that you are having feedback systems that are anonymous, by the way. Nobody wants to have their name attached to these things. Anonymous feedback. Make sure that you are having, more applicants of this scenario, more people being hired this, more people being promoted that meet this. Make sure that your production is going up. Make sure that your employee retention and satisfaction are going up. Have KPIs, have measurables. Without those, you're just floundering in the water.
Mhm. And one thing, as you were talking about that too, about the anonymous feedback loop, once again, I came back to, like, okay, well, if you're in an office, maybe you have a little box, people could just drop something in. They don't have to have a name on it or whatever.
Right.
But again, if you're working remotely, how do people provide that feedback in an anonymous way? So you're not like, oh, that came from that email or that came from, this
Great
particular
question.
person.
That is a great question. So there are a lot of free to very cheap tools out there. I like to use Survey Legend. So you surveylegend.com. and you just create the little forms. They fill them out and you see nothing. It just,
Okay.
all it does is give you the data. That's it. And that is a perfect way. And you just let people know. We will literally, like, nobody, not even the admin, can see your information. Nobody. So you are safe. It is okay. Just put whatever you need to put in there. That's how I like to do it. And kind of on that note too about cost. So the Department of Labor issued a statement and a study that showed that 54% of accommodations are free. And then there's another something around 20% that are under $10. So just keep in mind, this is not going to be expensive. But that's how I do it. I use Survey Legend, but there's plenty of other technologies out there that will mask everything for you. It's very simple.
And is that possible for them? So I can see how, like, if I say, I want to just survey my staff, I'm going to send it out, you all fill it out. I'm not going to know who does it, but does it also have the capability where I want to submit an idea and I can just go to a link?
Yeah, it's just a link.
That?
You just go boop and just
perfect.
Away you go. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Of course, I've known of actually having surveys when people like submit it all at one time, but I didn't know about I could just click this and provide it at any
it's a
time.
new thing now. They've been doing it. The Survey Legend's been around for a couple of years, and they're my favorite, like I said, but there's other ones out there that do it that are wonderful. Another great tool for the communication style. This is great for your customers, not just your employees, but it's great for your customers, your marketing, everything. Look up, I recommend to anyone on this call, they're brand new to the market. I've messed with their product. It's phenomenal. They have more great rollouts coming out. Storied is the name of it, STORIED. And they are an inclusive written communication technology. So the idea is, it kind of sends it in bullet points. You can click on the bullet points and it opens up and elaborates different things. You can talk to it instead of typing everything. You just talk and it fills in ideas for you, and it summarizes and it creates everything. It's what Chat GPT was supposed to do, but it doesn't actually do it. It's wonderful, wonderful tool. It makes everything simpler. It streamlines it. It's inclusive for the neurodiverse and also for the physically diverse communities. Highly recommend, and it's going to be very cost effective as well. That's my plug for them.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I know this has been an interesting discussion. Again, I think it's been important to start talking about this. I recently, again, had 2 other interviews kind of on similar topics. So I think this is going to be another just added feature, for people to be able to hear the details and had a different perspective in terms of some of the things you shared. So I'm so glad that we had this conversation. I'm glad that you were here to talk about it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was fun. And like I said, you asked a question I hadn't been asked before. So that was nice.
Well, that's always good. I like to know kind of how things began, and the listeners can then hear like, well, why is this person an expert in this area? So that's why I like to talk about that too.
Yeah.
So thanks so much.
I study humans just all the time. I don't think you should be in HR, people operations, if you don't just study humans all the time. I mean, I am constantly reading studies, going to talks, I have to all the time. I can't help it.
Nice. Well, I'm glad that that's enjoyable to you. Some people would say no.
And I get that. I do. But don't be in HR. That's what you're going to do.
So if you have an offer that you would like to share with our audience, I would love for you to say what that is. And also, how can the listeners connect with you if they want to find out more information?
Absolutely. So I'm going to start with how to connect with me. So I'm one of like 3 Katherine McCords on LinkedIn in the US with my spelling. So I'm super easy to find. Definitely come find me on there. I live on LinkedIn. Also, my speaker site is kmccordspeaking.com. Then there's my professional site for my brand Titan Management, which is titanmanagementusa.com. You can find me at any of those 3 places, and I'm happy to respond and interact with you. In terms of an offer, not really, but definitely if you want me to come speak, if you want me to teach, reach out. But then what I'm going to say is I am willing to send you that accommodation list. If you just say that you heard me on this episode, met me through Candy, I'm happy to send it to you for free. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or one of those sites, and I will get that out to you ASAP.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in today. I hope you found this topic interesting and enjoyed the informative discussion. Would you please share my show with those you know and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform? I'd really appreciate your support. If you have any additional questions or comments, be sure to reach out to my guest at any of the links that they shared, or you could send me a message at media@abandp.com. I hope you can join me for my next interview, and remember, you can connect with me on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and my website is abandp.com. This episode is sponsored by Affordable Bookkeeping and Payroll Services. If you are overwhelmed trying to handle the financial aspects of your business, AB&P is here to help. Contact us today to discuss your needs at 310-534-5577 or contact@abandp.com. My team and I are eager to assist you. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Biz Help for You. Please join your host, Candy Messer, again next time. Have a terrific day.